Welcome, Welcome, travelers. Welcome, travelers, to another installment of Attarik's Crew. It is I, the Teller, and I am here as always to tell you a tale. Now, before we begin, my conspirator has asked me to extend our gratitude to the mysterious benefactors Yev, Nomad, and Backblaze for helping us keep the stories flowing and the fires going. So thank you to all of you. Now today's tale will cover all that has previously transpired during the next few installments of the travels and travails of our favorite unit of Attarik's Crew. And now, without further ado, on to our tale. Our story begins 1 month after the crew's initial adventure, and it is again the most wonderful day of the week, Pancake Day. And whilst enjoying this most sacred day with the customary butter, syrups, and even exotic jams, Commander Atarik himself enters the mess and taps each of our heroes one by one to gain their attention. Given the situation, Polly attempts to stuff as many pancakes into her mouth as she can before she has to abandon the table and come to the attention before Atarik. The crew gathers in Atarik's office to find both Vesdruth and Atarik peering down over maps spread out over the commander's desk. Atarik informs the crew that an immediate adventure is taking way. They will be taking the route of the high sea, and this is met with an immediate chorus of concerns and doubts. Unfazed by their antics, the commander continues his orders, letting them know to seek out the craft with our banner and inform the crew that you will serve as the acting marines in the craft. The commander is interrupted by a knock on his door, which both Hazel and Klesh turn to answer. They swing the door wide open and greet the visitor warmly. A man at the door is dressed in the city's official livery and is holding a letter. This man the crew all recognize as one of the men who was following them on their last mission, Gilmeth Atef. After Gilmeth recovers, he asks if Mr. Atarik is available, as he has a letter to deliver to him. As astute as ever, Klesh mostly closes the door to inquire of Atarik if he is indeed here to see this man. To which Atarik responds with, "No, but I will take the letter." Klesh relays to Gilmeth that the colonel is indeed not in to see him, but he will happily take the message when he is in. Exasperated, the courier hands over the scroll with the city's official seal on it, and loudly thanks Klesh so that everyone in the room may hear. As soon as the door is closed, Klesh turns to the colonel and brightly informs him of the message that has arrived. After opening the scroll, Atarik releases a string of explicatives and commands Vesdruth to finish giving out details for the crew's next adventure. Vesdruth confirms their orders and sends our troops on their way. As the crew makes their way out, Ralder lets everyone know that they should pack their swimsuits, just in case, but make sure to come dressed in their normal adventuring attire. Clush remarks that they don't have a swimsuit, as vast bodies of water do indeed frighten them. Polly and Hazel immediately sound off to take Clush and shopping, so they can buy them a swimsuit and a round floaty to help them feel more comfortable on the journey, while Ralder offers to tie planks of wood to Clush, because Ralder is sure that wood floats. Hazel also offers up the traditional Noma's pastime of floating on a chariot of ducks. And then Hazel and Ralder discuss the likelihood that the boat will sink, and how ducks are terrible to maintain, and you really don't want them to imprint on you. Meanwhile, Polly took Clush out to buy them both appropriate matching seafaring outfits, and it's not too long until they emerge in classic Mommy and Me navy blue and white striped sailor suits. Everyone is much amused by their antics. In the morning, the crew gather together, one by one, to find the ship. Hazel, who arrived first, sees a beautiful ship with glowing white sails and Atarik's crest gleaming in the morning sun. The ship itself has a high gloss and is an obvious point of pride for Atarik. It is not too long until the rest of the crew gather together and are ready to board the ship. Ralder steps forward and introduces them, saying that they are the Marines and they are ready to board. But it appears that this is not the ship meant for our crew, and they must move along to find the correct docking. But it is not long after that Clush recognizes the passing wind, a small yet stalwart ship that they have had dealings with before. The passing wind appears as if it were many large casks bound together by iron bands, with far too many hatches, far too close to the waterline for anyone to be comfortable. It sits small and jaunty, with Atarik's banner flying merrily in the wind as the crew approach the gangplank. Standing beside the ship is a woman of great height, as wide as she is tall, bouncing happily to a song that only she can hear. As she turns around, Clush, much to their discomfort, recognizes the woman as Bertha Beestinger. Bertha spots Clush and hails them excitedly with her signature vocal affectation, putting heavy bubbling stress on every B that she enunciates. As the crew boards the passing wind, they find that it's almost entirely run by gnomes, which Hazel is all too familiar with, due to his unusual upbringing, of course. Our heroes take a moment to explore the small vessel and find their sleeping quarters, when they come across rows of benches in the lowest deck, and much to everyone's chagrin, it becomes apparent that the ship mostly runs on crew power. Bertha lets the crew know that once they're settled in, they are to meet the captain, Benny Bobberdip. The crew gathers around the man with the largest feather in his hat, correctly assuming he is indeed the captain. Captain Bobberdip explains that once the ship makes way, our heroes will all participate in a series of team-building exercises. Then our crew is greeted by a suave and masculine tiefling, his horns growing back from his forehead as if he'd slicked them back with his hair. This tiefling confirms what the captain had experienced as part of Colonel Atarik's original plan. Ralder is not pleased. Sly Divine introduces himself to the crew by taking Polly's hand as she swoons from the sight of him. Pleased with her reaction, he shares a wink with Hazel and greets the rest of the crew, charm oozing from every pore. And as he leaves, the crew finds themselves meeting a new crew member. The tall, very fit man covered in swirling, pale blue tattoos. He calmly introduces himself as Tenor, and lets our heroes know that he will be leading them in one of the team-building activities. But then Tenor calls down to Bonk, the last of the ship's main team. Our crew hears the sound of heavy armor clattering up the stairs, and Bonk is revealed to be a jolly gnome in full plate. And now that everyone has met one another, the captain lets the crew know that they are ready to set sail, and calls to have the sails lowered. As the ship hits open water, Bonk gathers Atarik's crew and heads down to the undership where the benches on the third lower deck are. He announces that they will now begin their first group-building exercise, which is endurance. Everyone is given a spot at a bench, with pedals below them, while a gnome in front beats out a steady rhythm on a timpani drum. Polly and Ralder express their dislike of the activity and attempt to release, only to be guilted into place. It takes a moment for Polly to find her rhythm, but it doesn't take long for our crew to fall into place. Then they're all called into ramming speed, and the pace picks up to double time. Our heroes grit their teeth and push onward until they get the call to leave their positions. Together they gather around Bonk as he hands them each a leather strap with a disc bearing Atarik's symbol on it. Then he hands them all a small black bead to be placed on the strap and tells them that this bead is the symbol of stamina, with which he gives a final word of hydrate and dismisses them to the instructions to find Sly for their next activity. Back on the upper deck, the wind is blowing, the sea air is rich, and the ship's crew of many gnomes are bustling about their daily routines. And then there's Sly, standing poised in the sunshine, smiling handsomely, while he waits for our heroes to gather around. Klesh desperately tries to hide behind Ralder as they move closer. When Sly explains that he is in charge of handing out red beads given to those who are proficient with knots. Everyone gathers themselves around the post beside Sly, where 5 lengths of rope are waiting for them. Sly demonstrates how to tie several knots, and it's everyone's task to replicate them. It seems that only Ralder is able to keep up with the activity, while Polly, Hazel, and Klesh all seem to struggle. In an attempt to make Klesh feel more comfortable in his presence, Sly chats with them about their being a Verdan, and how it almost feels as if Klesh may have grown just a little bit taller since they've been on board. And while chatting, Sly is able to teach Klesh how to tie their knots and build up their confidence at the same time. Then he turns to Polly, guiding his soft hands over hers as he helps her to untangle herself from her rope. Polly redens and sputters as he helps her to understand how to work the knot until she is freely able to replicate it on her own. Lastly, Sly turns to Hazel, who has severely knotted his wrists together in a poor show of dexterity. Sly pulls Hazel close into his embrace from behind and mutters his disbelief to Hazel, slyly showing a small fang in his smile. Unfazed, Hazel brightens as he's released and manages to repeat the same binding around his wrists again. Sly chuckles and helps him out, before gently guiding him to tie the proper knots. Polly is completely enamored by this scene. They huddle together and tie knots for quite some time into the afternoon, when Sly gives them all their own red bead to add to their cord. And with a cavalier smile, Sly instructs them to find Tenor, who is quietly sitting on the deck, enjoying the sea spray. As the crew settles onto the deck around him, Tenor lets them know that during this time, each of them will be taking a moment to sit and share something that scares them. And with each other, they will build a safe space and grow stronger as friends. Tenor goes first, and offers that Ralder will follow suit with one of his fears. Ralder has a hard time coming up with anything to open up about to the group, and gives a farce about the worry he would feel if he were to ever misplace his precious pipe. And while Tenor is kind about the lack of an appropriate answer, he offers to let another member go next. Hazel takes this opportunity to share that he is most terrified of his parents' expectations, to which Polly pipes up and agrees that she also has the same fear. Tenor thanks them both for sharing their fears, and turns back to Ralder, who offers up a more heartfelt fear of enclosed spaces. Then Tenor turns to Klesh, and they share that their biggest fear is that they don't know anything about their past and where they came from, which leads them to ultimately fear their future. And after some supported banter, Tenor passes out blue beads of friendship to each of them to add to their leather strap. And as Atarik's crew begins to stand up and dust themselves off, a peppy gnome from the lower decks offers out buckets and mops while informing them that this will help them gain the coveted brown bead. Now, travelers, let's take a moment to remember that one of our dear adventurers has been absent from all of these team-building exercises. That's right. Carvis and her faithful companion Bane have slept in this morning and have completely missed the boat. From a dead of sleep, she rises up, and in panic, Carvis jumps to her feet and startles Bane. The two of them now tripping and falling over one another until unceremoniously their bodies fall heavily onto a magic circle that has laid dormant on Carvis's floor. Then Bane's eyes glow with a terrible light, and he begins to speak to Carvis in a voice far too high-pitched and much stranger than anything she has ever heard before. Bane instructs Carvis that she must complete 3 tasks before they are able to join her friends. Bane tells her that she needs to endure, and power surges through her, causing her to pass out. Once Bane rouses her, he tells her that now she must show a mastery of dexterity, as he leads her in a number of difficult yoga poses. Lastly, Bane demands Carvis share her deepest fear, and after some deliberation, Carvis admits that she fears failing at baking the bread and pastries that she is so knowledgeable of. The echoes of her friend's fears swirl around her ears as a glowing light emerges over her hand. When the light dissipates, all that is left in her palm is the disc and a leather strap, sporting a black, red, and blue bead. She can feel the bond she shares with her crew grow stronger, and then with a booming bark, the magic circle under their feet begins to glow wildly. Back to the passing wind. A terrible crack of thunder sounds, drawing the attention of dark, swirling clouds that are closing in on the ship. The crew looks up over their mops and buckets and sees a blazing red fireball erupt from the clouds, heading straight toward the ship. Then, the horrific sound of Klesh's agonized screams cut through the air. A red magic circle burns itself onto the deck of the ship as Klesh's body begins to violently writhe as their limbs begin to break and elongate. During all this commotion, Carvis and Bane merge from a cloud of smoke that appears over the magic circle. The crew gathers around their fallen comrade, trying to make sense of all this commotion. Carvis pulls herself together and informs the group that Klesh must be going through a Verdan phenomenon, much like puberty, where their body drastically changes within either a matter of minutes or the course of a few years. Around them, deep water swells are swirling faster and angrier around the ship. Outside of our group, the crew of the Passing Wind is frantically moving about in panic. The captain calls over the din that the ship is under attack. Quickly, our heroes decide it would be best to put Klesh into the lower decks, and as Hazel and Carvis try to move them off the deck, Polly points out something in the water that is rushing at the boat double quick. Ralder looks out over the bow, and he sees that the creature in the water is what he hopes isn't a dragon turtle, despite knowing that's exactly what it is. The captain is alerted to the peril and calls out for Wydelia, the ship's cleric. Wydelia rushes to her captain's side and attempts to shrink down the dragon turtle, but too late. Ralder sees that Wydelia is standing halfway in the magic circle that was scorched into the deck when Carvis arrived. With Wydelia's spell cast asunder, she collapses to the ground, and it appears that the dragon turtle is now even bigger than before, when the world suddenly goes dark. The crew is then thrown into a battle against a mass of quippers that are washed on deck from the rushing water. The battle is long and arduous as the team try to defend themselves and the ship from the invading creatures. And sometime during the battle, it becomes apparent to everyone on the ship that they are indeed in the stomach of the dragon turtle. It appears that Wydelia's spell backfired and shrunk the boat instead of the beast. With the realization that soon the spell will wear off, everyone realizes they will still be in the belly of the beast. And much to the horror of everyone conscious, there is only one way to get out of this predicament, and that is to run the digestive course they find themselves in. Together, the crew all begin to agitate the inner lining of the dragon turtle to encourage it to eject them quicker rather than later. And because this is the part I have been asked to never speak of, I shall gloss over the tight, musky, and muddy escape from the bowels of the beast. It is not long till everyone is blinded by the sun breaking through the clouds outside, back out on the open ocean. Startled and broken, our heroes find themselves ways to get cleaned and patch up their shaking nerves, as Captain Benny passes out a brown bead to each of the crew members on the ship, stating that even more so have they earned it now. Our crew takes the time to slip the final bead onto the leather strap, completing the collection and releasing a pulse of magic from the disc. It is not long that the ship finds rocks, and the crew is washed ashore, surrounded by the broken shambles of what was once the stalwart passing wind. Amidst all the chaos, Teller kindly offers to help piece together remnants of Klesh's and Rauder's clothes to make them something more fitting of Klesh's now doubled in height body. Everyone begins to band together to salvage what they can of the ship and its cargo. Captain Benny tasks Attarik's crew to venture out and find civilization and send help to their marooned ship. And after shifting through their maps, Klesh figures out that they've never been this far north and doesn't know how to navigate this land. But with the help of Polly's angelic Awesomere wings, she is able to fly up with Klesh high into the air and point out where he can start a new drawing. Off in the distance, they see that there is some smoke coming up, which gives the crew a good idea of where to start their journey to find help. Then after a couple of days of recovery in camp, out on the beach, Teller and Sly make their way over and present bundles of reconstructed clothes, now to fit Klesh's size and shape. Grateful for the clothes and the time to heal, the team start their journey into an unknown land, heading toward the south to find help. They walk for some time until they come to the edge of a large clearing of land. As they cross into the circle, our crew experiences an odd sensation akin to the popping of their ears. While the feeling of entering the waste was jarring, no one senses anything bad or sinister about the clearing, so they decide to make camp in an outcropping of stones beside a trench. During the night, the team takes turns keeping watch, which turns out to be completely uneventful, other than a few birds, and everyone in the morning wakes up refreshed and ready to continue their journey. After packing up camp, they cross over to the other side of the clearing and back into the trees. And as they cross into the trees, the ear popping happens again. This does strike everyone as odd, but as the sight of the hut with smoke coming from its chimney is far more exciting than to allow anyone to dwell on the strange feeling of their ears. Walking back into the camp is a man carrying a bundle of wood, but as he spots our crew, he throws his arms into the air and claims to have nothing of value. But after a bit of banter, Klesh is able to convince the man that they come in peace and only need to find help for their shipwrecked friends. This man introduces himself as Brigitte, and then asks the crew just what it was like to be without magic the entire time they were in the clearing. The crew all look confused as Brigitte explains that he is an arcane caster and doesn't care to be in the clearing too long, as it can feel rather like living underwater, and it's rather uncomfortable without his magic, especially the feeling of not being able to breathe. While they all discuss the odd sensation they had walking in and out of the clearing, one of Brigitte's horses begins to neigh and stamp. Alarmed, the crew attempts to suss out the reason for the horse's discomfort when Brigitte explains that it must be kobolds. It appears there is a group of kobolds nearby that often raid his camp and steal supplies. The crew is then instructed to wave anything with bright light and bang anything they can to make loud sounds. Hazel and Carvis both help with dancing lights and thaumaturgy to create bright lights in the camp. Klesh is concerned that the kobolds might be nice and doesn't want to be mean, but is cowed by their foul and dirty language as the kobolds come into earshot. As everyone does their best to scare the band of kobolds away, Polly aims her gun into the air and fires a warning shot, which promptly makes all the kobolds scatter, except for 3, who fall to the floor stunned, and one who attempts to dig itself away from danger. Brigitte receives the digging kobold and discovers that every one of them is completely drunk. He holds the little creature up by its tail as it screams and curses that the bravery juice it took isn't working. Carvish and Klesh help Brigitte to encourage the leftover 4 kobolds to find themselves home, while Rauder inquires about how often kobolds actually do raid this camp. During this discussion, the crew discovers that there are no other nearby ports to help the passing wind, and discuss the logistics of a 2-day ride, or a short trip into the forest to find an artifact strong enough to charge a magic portal spell. Ultimately, Brigitte does convince the crew to follow him into the kobold camp to find a magically charged artifact that the kobolds are treating as their new deity. It seems that one of the kobolds dropped their hand-carved effigy of a flask, and he believes it to be possessed of enough power to get their whole team home via a portal spell. So once again, led by Klesh, they track the kobold's trail, and the party enters the wood to quickly come upon a kobold standing guard, completely drunk. After walking past the trail, littered with wasted kobolds, they find a cave with a small opening, one only large enough for a small creature to walk through. It's quickly decided that this is the kobold's hideout, and one by one the crew drops to their hands and knees to crawl through. Once inside the cavern, they are able to get to their feet, but with a bit more help from Klesh, who is in their favored terrain, they find themselves at the center of the cavern, where they discover the giant magical flask, guarded by a litany of drunken and passed-out kobolds littering the floor. Klesh speaks with a hatchling kobold, who advises Klesh and their crew not to take the brave juice, because it only can lead to bad things. So Klesh and Hazel pull together to distract the hatchling by convincing them that the glass eye from Klesh's pack is known as the Seeing Eye of Hopper, as Hazel makes the eye sparkle with dancing lights. Then Rauder comes in with an assist to inspire awe in the hatchling, and while the hatchling is indeed in awe, Klesh takes the flask down from its apparatus, and as it comes crashing to the floor, it startles awake quite a few of the kobolds. Seeing that their precious flask is now in the hands of Klesh, they all rush the party, and everyone is pulled into a raucous battle. Klesh continues to try to convince them that of their new idol, while the others try to keep them back. Polly, who is trying to get the kobolds to stop their attacks, activates her radiant soul and stretches out her glimmering incorporeal wings and narrows lovely glimmering eyes. Then she raises her gun far above her head and fires another warning shot. Many of the kobolds prostrate themselves quickly at Polly's feet. Then Hazel pulls out his fruit and demonstrates, trying to convince the rest of the kobold to join in the worship of the angelic Polly, who was now known as Hopper. Luckily enough, with the help of the whole crew, they are able to convince the tipsy kobolds that Polly is their new idol, and it is represented by the all-seeing eye of Hopper. They are able to escape with the flask relatively unscathed. Brigitte is able to take the flask and use its magic to create a portal that sends all of our crew to the basement of the slovenly Crawdad, which our team realizes is back in their home base of Gravisport. Confused how they are now supposed to go back to the passing wind in order to send them proper help that they'll need, they make their way out and try to find their way back to the headquarters in town. The group runs in to Tanner Futson, and as she spots them, she promptly spits her drink into the face of her companion, who also turns and is speechless by their presence. This person is Teth, and the other of the men who had been stalking our crew during their first mission. At the sight of everyone, he exclaims and immediately runs away. Then Tanner jumps down and greets our crew, letting them know that everyone thought that they had been dead, since it had been several weeks since they had been seen. Now I will tell you, travelers, this news confuses our crew immensely, As to their knowledge, they've only been away from the passing wind for a few days. Carvis postulates that maybe something happened with them while they were in the strange clearing, while Tanner leads the crew out to Atarik, and then they tell them of their tale. The commander is indeed impressed by their stories, and quickly makes plans to send them back to the coast so they can get the crew of the passing wind the proper help they need. Our heroes board the ship known as Vesdruth's Fang, and are quickly under the impression that this ship has much more of a competent crew. The journey is quick, and it is quiet, and they are able to recover everyone from the passing wind and bring them safely home to Gravisport, all while they debrief the whole journey to Vesdruth. And that, dear travelers, is where our story ends today. As mentioned before, I extend our gratitude to the mysterious benefactors, Yev, Nomad, and Backblaze. Thank you again for helping us keep all of our stories flowing and all of our fires going. So without further ado, please, travel on.